All right, everyone, we're live.
Okay, I'd like to bring this meeting to order. It's 9:03. We have a quorum. This is the special meeting of the Board of Education to continue deliberation on the fiscal year 23 budget. So in terms of timeline, this is our final scheduled workshop. We have two other special meetings scheduled for this week. Tomorrow evening, I don't have the time. I think it might be 6. It's 6 tomorrow evening for further deliberation. And if we're ready to approve the budget and pass it on to the selectmen. If we have further questions and we don't approve the budget, there's another opportunity on Thursday if we need to. I would like to wrap it up tomorrow evening if we can, but there's no requirement to. I think by the end of this week, we definitely need to wrap it up. So for this morning, there was a couple of items. Posted, and if you know what I have in my notes is that there was still a question about staffing and how staffing is going to progress over the next couple of years. And I think Phil posted a chart there that we should go through. There's some questions about our competitor districts in Durg A, what their budgets are looking like this year. And I think not all have come out with their proposed budgets, but a few have, and I think there's a chart there. And there's also a chart on some historicals, Durg A, expenditures over the last 13 years, population, the evolution of school population and some other data. That's just good information for the board and the public, I think, to have, and we can do that as well before we end this session. And then finally, to go over the multi-year budget page and the operating, the capital budget, which was revised. So it's a lot to do in 2 hours. If we don't get through it in 2 hours, we could continue tomorrow evening before we're ready to vote on the budget. And then as well as, as we go along, any other questions board members have, both, that can be answered either this morning or if there's work to do, the administration and staff can prepare answers for tomorrow evening. But anyway, maybe Phil, Lisa, maybe can hand it off to you. See where you want to start first.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Pesco. I would defer to you guys where you want to start first. We can go through the documents that we attached, if that's helpful for today, or if there's any pending, pending question. I know that there was one of the documents was the Durg A budget comparison. For your review that I believe is in there. And if you look at the Durg A, there were 2 Wilton and Easton Reading that were unavailable. I don't know if that's changed. Phil, did we hear about that coming in? Probably not.
I don't think so. Last I checked late last week, there weren't available as yet.
There were no. But if you look at the others, we are, our increase is below the other 4. And again, keeping in mind that part of it is that dental claim. So that's kind of it.
I think if you go, I don't know if you want to put that up, or it's probably good to share it for a second.
Sure. Mr. DeVito, can you handle that, or who, or Ms.
It's fine. I can share it if possible.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
I'm not very good at this sharing mode.
Can you guys see that or not yet?
Yeah,
Yeah, there it is.
It's interesting to note Westport with Mr. Scarice is at a 3.78. We are at a 3.48. And then New Canaan with Dr. Luzzi is at an 8.59, which is an increase of almost $8 million. That's New Canaan. So I don't know if there are any comments, concerns. Again, if you look down below, we were just putting in the note that the dental claims put almost 0.8% of our increase.
Well, I think that if you compare apples to apples, meaning last year's budgeting, because we actually didn't run dental claims through the operating budget. So on an apples and apples basis, it's a 2.69 increase. We're running the dental claims through the operating budget, so that brings it to 3.48. I think East and Reading and ER9 probably, are later on in February, as well as Wilton. I think they come. They propose their budget. Now, these are proposed budgets. These are not budgets that have been adopted by any of the Board of Educations or the town, but just a good, it's a good view of where everyone is. And, I think, and, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, or Lisa, but I think that it's really the increases are in very similar places. Health insurance, sped costs, health insurance, and increase in staffing to deal with some of the reentry issues that are COVID related. I think everyone's seeing roughly the same thing in different orders of magnitude, right?
That's correct. I don't know if you would like to move now to the capital budget.
Why don't you bring up the historic? Well, we're on budgets. Why don't
Okay,
you bring
sure.
up the historical chart, which might be interesting.
Which one, which historical, Tony?
Yeah, the next page that was
Got it.
the next page that was actually posted.
You want me to share that one as well, Lisa?
Yeah, you can share that one. That might
Yeah,
be.
if you could be the person that chairs, that's great, Phil.
Yeah, this is something that's from the state database as well. To put some context, these are the Durgay schools, and if you go back and look at the last 13 years, the school population, you kind of see where the Durgay has been on average versus us, and we've definitely seen a school population decrease, and some have seen similar to ours, some have seen less than ours, but this gives a kind of a view on where the Durg has been in terms of population, school population. Operating budget, this is kind of the change in operating budgets over the last 13 years for the Durgay schools, and the average annual change. You can see where we are versus the other Durgay schools, and in terms of their investments in school over the last 13 years. Cost per pupil, everyone has seen a significant increase in the cost per pupil. We're still pretty high in the Durg, but over the course of 13 years, there's been a significant increase in all of the Durgay schools. And the other interesting thing, and this is not school budget discussion, is what has been the impact on mill rate over the last 13 years. And you kind of see, us at a 34.6% increase in the mill rate over the last 13 years. And obviously this doesn't have 20 and 21 data, which was not in the state database yet. But, and you can see some of the towns where schools had a significant increase, though their mill rates, are in green there. Places like Westport, New Canaan, Darien, which has a more significant commercial base, even though they had a very high increase in their school operating expense, their mill rates still didn't increase all that much compared to some of the other towns which are more similar to ours, like Ridgefield, Wilton, and East and Reading. So this is, I'm not sure that, everyone digs into the data in terms of understanding school population and expenditures over the long haul and how we compare to the Durg. So this was I think a tidbit of information for the administration, the board members, and the public, so that can put everything in some proper context. I don't know if there's any questions or comments. Okay, where do you want to go to the capital budget
The
next?
capital budget, or would you, maybe we should stick with the, do you want to delve into the grant?
Yeah, the staffing. Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
great.
why don't we look at the staffing? So Phil, put together the staffing and to separate it out a little bit more, because I know there's a concern of what are reoccurring grants and what are not. So this is the page that we're referencing now. If we can put that up. You can see that with the reoccurring grants, all of those total of IDEA, as well as Title I, the grand reoccurring grants of 11.8, that's a reoccurring grant. All of that staffing is, it continues based on that grant. So it's self-funded. I think it's the non-reoccurring grants that we need to look at. Phil, can you put that thing up, that chart? Oh, sorry. And this is where, when you look at the budget book, you see the ESSER2, the ARP ESSER, you see the academic support, the SPED secretary, SPED para educator. If you start with, for example, let's just start with the SPED secretary. The SPED secretary for next year, that's a 1.0 position. That is a non-reoccurring, because the thought behind that is to be able to get us up to compliance.
Sorry, Lisa, where are you on this chart?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the, okay, so we looked at the reoccurring grants, and you can see that the reoccurring grants is the 11.3, the down to the 11.8. That's reoccurring by federal funds. We receive that money. That includes Title I, the IDEA, all of that. All of those positions are paid for by that. So that does not come into the operating budget. I was trying to delve into the non-reoccurring grants so
Right.
people could, perhaps see some more clarity on that. And Phil and Ken, please feel free to join in. If you look at the non-reoccurring grants, specifically in the area of academic support, there is the intervention that is in the response to what we think are some needs, specifically in math and reading. And that is the 2.1. There was another chart that I had done that talks specifically about, what happens when that funding goes away. And we're very conscious of when that funding goes away and how to mitigate that. So in the one of the responses that we gave to you, we talked about how the math intervention, the percentages by the operating budget, that's why we had moved some of it over. But the goal is with that intervention is to hopefully it will net out to zero the piece that is supported by ESSER. And it will depend, frankly, on our plan, our action plan, how we're doing the work with the level of intervention, professional development that we are providing. The SPED secretary, that's the position that Ms. Edwards spoke to about transferring to that new system and everything. That is a one-year position, that SPED secretary, and we do not plan on funding that again once we get everything up and running with the new software and transferring all of the all of the files and everything to that. Phil, can you please speak to the SPED para educator and the IDEA carryover, because that's the piece that we have to look at a little bit closely, and depending on our needs, if we will need them the following year.
Right. So in terms of just the idea behind the 3.7 and why we put a 3.7 to these grants is because we just wanted to utilize these grants while they were available for the upcoming fiscal year. We do have some level of exposure to the 3.7 in that they may flow into the operating budget for the 23-24 school year. And that's pretty much it. So in the multi-year, the revised multi-year that we sent in the Q&A, we did lay it out that is about $130,000 or so from this 3.7 that will flow to the operating budget for the subsequent school year.
So by the 3.7, you're taking the sped para educator, that's two sped para educators, and the IDEA carryover of 1.7 to give you the 3.7. So
Correct.
if you look at the 22-23 budget up top, the pink, and you see that how we are, how we are predicted to go from the operating to the grant to the total, and then the projection in 23-24 is the green, where we see then again that the projected grant funding is 11.8. That's taking away all those non-occurring grants. But as Phil said, regarding the sped paraeducator, the IDEA carryover, we have to see, quite frankly, how that plays out and if we will need that or not.
Mm-hmm. So that's the, Phil, that's the is that the $132,000 that potentially is at risk in the next year's budget?
That's correct.
Okay.
Is it 132, Phil, or is it more?
It's like 130, 135 in that range.
Okay. And how do we determine the number of sped para educators? Tracy, perhaps you can speak a little bit to that just to provide clarity around that.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. This is another decision that is very much tied to individual student need. When I'm planning the budget for the next year, there are conversations with each of the building administrators and also the assistant directors at each level to identify specifically who are the students who need one-to-one para support, who are the students who need support that's not necessarily one-on-one, how much of that support do they need, and how do we think that will translate into scheduling and how we can maximize the personnel in each of those grade levels. So it's very much based on individual student needs. So just like what we talk about with the other SPED budget lines, there can be variation and fluctuation depending on our population, both in planning for the school year and during the school year.
I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on, if you look at the academic support line up top with all the colors for 22-23, it's 8.5. And then for 23-24, it's 8.5. But you see how it goes down from a 2.6 to a 0.5. That 0.5 has frankly always been there. Correct, Ken? Because that's part of our, is it the reading intervention, Ken, that's funded by
Yes, that's the 0.5 that we use from Title I grant funding to apply to a reading specialist, a 0.5 reading specialist.
and that's been for years because it's been through the federal government. It's reoccurring.
So yeah, that's always been there through our Title I funding, and that'll continue to be there.
Okay.
So I guess I'm sorry, Lisa, just real quick. In
Yeah, go
terms
ahead.
of the takeaway from all this, right? So we have always had federal funding, not a lot, but we have enough that we can cover almost 12 FTEs. In terms of the future or the potential impact to future years, we're definitely at the 3.7, right? As Tracy said, it's based on each student and the needs for each student. We may, right? So as Lisa also alluded to, is that we have the intervention, right? And it all depends on how things are trending and the level of needs of the students as we get to those outer years. And that's when we will truly determine whether or not we will need additional FTEs. And I think Ken and Lisa will talk about the various data points that we'll use to assess and to determine the need for those students in the future years.
Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit on that when we look at and where we are in the progress of monitoring. We've already gone through, I believe, 2 rounds of NWEA.
Right there, we did include in the question and answer document an appendix that lists all the different assessments that we'll use to monitor progress, particularly in reading and math, but also in writing as well. So we use what's called benchmark assessments that we'll administer on a regular basis. Lisa is correct. We are actually in the midst of our second round of the MAP testing for reading and math. We're also collecting information through the Fountas and Pinnell assessment system. Those are two important indicators. For math, we also look at our unit assessment data, which is fairly standardized in the sense that all students take the same unit assessments. And we're able to look at that information. And there's several other, smaller assessments, particularly at the elementary level, that we use. But we will also share at a curriculum committee meeting how we are doing with those benchmark assessments, particularly looking at growth. So we'll see, to what extent students have made growth in reading and writing, and we're able to monitor that periodically this year and keep the board up to date on that.
I don't know does anyone have any questions or any clarifying questions or philosophical any questions at all about the staffing?
I have one. Ken, to what you were just speaking to, how are we measuring student progress as compared to, what we're seeing on the chart in terms of the non-recurring grant money? I guess what I'm wondering is how much of any progress that we see can be attributed to staffing change, more a smaller student to teacher ratio, more investment in terms of time of teaching staff with students versus lessons and metrics and ideas that are put into place in a classroom that are then carried forward year to year.
Right.
You see the distinction?
Yeah, I understand the question. It's a good question. And, we have a multi-pronged approach to addressing the math, goal that we have. And so one component is the intervention piece. And sometimes it's hard to just point to one specific strategy we're using. But if we look specifically at the intervention data, look at the number of students that are in SRBI, we look at their progress and how they're doing, we can get a sense of how effective those additional resources are. The tier one in the classroom in concert with that additional support in small group. We have that. We look at that in data teams. We look to see if students are growing with the particular intervention. And if they're not, we switch interventions and we look to a different strategy. But that's how we would monitor. We look at the number of students, the growth they're making. Are we able to get those students back to the regular classroom? And so that, I guess, in combination with the other strategies is key.
The other thing I would just add is remember that every math teacher in the district and every grade level, especially K through 5, has specific goals. And so there's also that process where the individual teachers, whether they be an interventionist or a classroom teacher, has set a goal regarding the children in front of them. And oftentimes it's a subgroup of the children in front of them and how are those children achieving. So you're right, Melissa, it's not only just looking at academic progress of the child, but getting right down to, okay, if these children now are at goal or they've made this amount of progress, let's say in January, February, and our administrators, that's why it's so important, they meet with the teachers, they have their mid-year meetings, their end of the year meetings, the data teams, they look and say, okay, so these children now are at goal, or they made this amount of progress. What do we do to get them there? Like there's the group that's specifically the group that, for example, is working with Michelle Clark at the middle school. She monitors those kids as the interventionist. And where are they? How much growth did they do? And then she's part of those team of teachers in the math team to talk about what was actually done, because it's a little bit challenging to see what's working at what level. The other thing we're involved in is these classroom walkthroughs. And Dr. Craw has just sent something out last week, again, to the administrators and the CILs in math about how many of these walkthroughs we want to accomplish before President's Day. That's another measure, sort of a snapshot of the strategies that they identified that we think are the most important to be able to increase students' academic progress, it's sort of like continual dipsticking. So how many do we hope to get, Ken? About a couple hundred more, correct, before President's Day?
Yeah, I mean, across the district, we're looking at, 300-400 walkthroughs since we started this process, which is significant.
And so to be able to say, okay, and then turn the data over to these teams, it's about them looking at it and then figuring out, what do we need to do? Like, gee, we're not practicing this strategy enough. Maybe we need to up our game in that particular area at that particular grade level. So it's that kind of an approach. And, fingers crossed, it's also all about building professional capacity within that tier 1, and that those teachers feel comfortable and supported so that they are able to really advance student performance.
No, thank you. That's a good answer. I think, when we're looking at this next year, the challenge will be, hopefully we'll see the results that we're hoping for, which is great. The challenge, I think, is looking at those results and seeing, what is it that we can attribute to that success? And it's probably a multitude of factors, but, when we're looking at, some of the staffing choices, is it the individualized attention that's really first and foremost, or is it the fact that these interventionists were able to develop systems and processes that all the teachers were able to implement, and what a great improvement we're seeing across the board. So it's tough. I think it's good to start thinking about these things so that next year, when we're looking at this more critically, we can, we have some framework to use.
Sure. I think of like at the math lab and, at the high school, what is going on in that math lab? This is the first time we really spent a lot of attention looking at the Algebra 1 and the entry point in 9th grade and putting in some very specific strategies and opportunities for students. And we're watching that very carefully. Ms. Cavoni, would you like to add anything to that piece?
Sure. The math lab was new to the high school last year and was very successful in its first year of implementation. And we actually added staffing to the math lab at the high school for this year. So what they're doing, I think, kind of follows what Lisa described earlier. It depends on the students and their needs. So those teachers are pushing into regular classrooms. They are pulling students out. There are one-on-one appointments. Students can just drop in for extra help. There's a lot of service that's offered through that programming, which is really phenomenal and has been truly helpful at those lower levels, particularly with those Algebra 1 students that, we were looking at more closely this year. So we're, as many of you know, we just started our midterms this morning. So that will be another data point coming out of that, how the students fare on the Algebra 1 midterm as well.
I think that you're right, Melissa. We really have to keep our eye constantly focused on the academic return on investment, because we have these interventions, these pieces, the CILs. How can we best strategize to use the funding that we have to make the biggest impact on our kids? And that's what we're committed to do.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a quick clarification. Lisa, can you just reiterate for us, in the budget, when we talk about the 3.5%, what percentage of that is contractual obligations? Because we don't know in the sheet that was shown earlier with the other Durgay schools, we don't have that level of detail, right? But we know for Weston anyhow, when you look at the budget increase, there's a percentage of a contractual obligation, or maybe Phil.
Sure, I believe it's about 78%, and I'm confident in saying that the other Durgays pretty much follow suit with that. Phil, is that about right? 78%, or it's like 36 million, correct? Something
Yeah,
like
and combined in terms of medical, just benefits and contractual obligation, we're looking at about 78 or so percent.
Does that include, Phil, does that include transportation, which is a contractual obligation?
No, this is primarily speaking about salaries.
salaries.
Yeah.
So about 78% of the 3.48% is contractual.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, should we move on to the capital budget?
Yep,
So the capital budget, I believe we've added about $600,000 worth of items that I know Mr. Dalmestro and Mr. Cross worked on, is specifically geared to the middle school where some things had been, kind of put on hold. So Mr. Cross, would you like to elaborate about that, please?
Sure. I think we spoke about this briefly at our previous meeting, where we did add a few items for the middle school. We're going to focus on some ductwork cleaning there as well.
why don't you throw that up on the.
Can you put
on
it
the
up there,
screen?
please?
So for the middle school, we included the middle school in our ductwork cleaning. The goal right now is really for the middle school is to focus on a lot of the items that relate to health and safety. As we've spoken several times about the FOC and the work that's currently in place, we just wanted to focus on those items that are more health and safety related. So we added the ductwork, as I mentioned before. We also added replacement of some sinks. We added a price to be determined for just overall replacement of our pumps. The direction that we're leaning towards, right, it's a little bit difficult to determine if there's one particular pump that will fail, because a lot of the mechanical that's in the middle school is original to the building. So we're hoping to request sort of kind of like a contingency fund to set aside for the middle school. We did have about 25,000 or so that the Board of Finance did approve last year. So we're just hoping to add to that. We did, outside of the middle school, we also have here the 7th and 8th grade lockers. We did replace the lockers, I believe, for the 6th grade, Dan, if I'm correct, a year or two ago. And we just added the upgrade for the 7th and 8th grade. We did get some pricing for item number 8, which is the district-wide paving. And this is really for only one school. This is for the high school. And based on the square footage that's there, or the square yards, it's going to be approximately $550,000. We know that's a big request, and we got this number late on Friday, and we are really debating if we should invest this much money right now or look into alternatives to maybe extend the life of the parking lot.
So what does this number include?
This is
Sorry, I
only
missed
for
that.
milling. This is an estimate for milling and repaving of the main parking lot of the high school, the front parking lot.
Right. Okay.
So for next year, without the
What's the, for right now, is that, what is the shape, what shape is the parking lot in? And one of the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, once we look at the entire capital list for the entire town, the question will be, when does that have to be, when does that really have to be done?
Yeah, it's most of our parking lots that have not been done in many, many years.
Okay.
It is, can we extend this for one more year? We could.
Okay.
We always try to balance the need against the want. And given the town, whatever it is that a town may have in their capital project, and
Yeah.
given this everything else that we have going on at this point, we may be able to just do some repairs and just pull and extend the useful life for another year or two.
Yeah. Does this have, does the, every year the town has set aside certain dollars for road paving, right?
That it's not included.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering whether there's an economy of scale when you pave some roads, can use the same people that do the driveway, to the parking lot. I don't know. So probably.
Yeah. There may be, Tony, but in terms of just the work that's done and the work and the material that's involved, it's still going to be a significant ask. As you recall, at many for the past years with the Board of Finance, there's always been a lot of discussion around setting aside money for paving, because it is a significant expenditure.
Yep. Okay.
So based on where we are right now, we're looking at a 1.6 request for capital. 1.6 million request for capital.
You know, I think this is one where, you know, the Board of Finance ultimately has, this is where they have a line item veto on the entire town and school capital budget. And so this is always a matter of prioritization. How much can we afford to do in 1 year? Ultimately, a prioritization of the entire list, including the town list, right?
Just for members of the board, I'm going to revise this list, and for item 15, which is replacement of the pumps, I'm going to request just a contingency of $100,000.
Mhm.
So we will be sending out a revised list shortly.
So is this the same discussion we had last year? Is this going to be the same discussion, which is we don't like to put money aside for contingencies, come to us when you need it?
If I should base it on the discussion that we have had in previous years, I would say yes, we'll have the same discussions.
Okay.
Phil, can I ask a question on some of the capital items?
Sure.
So is there any value to color coding fiscal year 2023 and levels of importance, or are these all equally important? Because I think at one of the meetings we previously had, it might have been facilities. I think it was, I think Mark or someone had told us that right now it's really hard to get contractors. Costs for goods are exponentially higher this year than they were last year. So are there things that, I think what we asked about at the time was, are there things here that can be smartly deferred, but also the sense is the cost is higher than it was anticipated because of what's going on? Or are these all really items that need to be done because they're proactive preventative maintenance?
You know, when you think about it, I think a lot of these really, I mean, if you look at this, the significant dollars, right? You're looking at item 3, which is the cleaning for the duct work. That is something that needs to be done. I think Mike Del Mastro spoke about that and just the need to have that done. The tennis court repairs that absolutely, that's something that we need to get done. It's just not in a state right now, and we need to get that one done. The relining of the chimney, that needs to get done. So really, if I would take anything out from this list, I would probably take out item 16, which is for the lockers. And I would probably take out item 8, which is the pavement.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we have to address these other issues. You know, when you see things like fire panel replacements, that's critical. When you like that huge room at the high school, C5 air handler, that's not good. There's no air in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything
Problems.
safety related, we absolutely have to leave it. We know that.
Right. So Lisa, just real quick, just want to just give a quick in terms of C5. So we do have portable air conditioners in that classroom right now. So we do have some airflow. The main unit actually went down, and we went back and forth in terms of that. I think there was some reconfiguration at the high school that caused some changes there. So in terms of ventilation, we do have ventilation.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to imply there wasn't ventilation. I know that they did a workaround, but Julie, perhaps you can shed some light on how often that room is used and the size of the room.
It's a very large classroom, so the workaround is portable units, which are effective to a point. You know, it's a large room with a high ceiling, so they can only be somewhat effective. But it is truly a workaround. We use it as a traditional classroom. It's used every period of every day, and that is something that, I mean, at least in my opinion, is a necessary repair.
And just so that everyone is aware, the current unit or the older unit that failed, this unit only supplied heating. The replacement cost, what we have right now, is to include air conditioning to the space as well. And we are working with the town. We do have an engineer on the town, and we're working with them to see if there's any alternatives that we can do just to maybe reduce the cost. But based on our last estimate, this is a cost just to do that. Not a 1-for-1, but to add a cooling component for this classroom.
Okay, so it sounds like of the list, the only two items that there's some level of discretion on would be the district-wide repaving and the lockers at the middle school.
Correct. So that would be $660,000.
And lockers had been replaced recently for some grade level, right?
We did. We did replace them for one grade level, I think, in the 1920 school year.
Dan, can you elaborate on that,
Yes,
please?
and thank you for that, because those were the lockers in need of most repair. I have to say, we're not seeing near the number of locker jams that we used to in the past. So I think that we can postpone the locker replacement without any major issue. The custodians are able to keep up with the repairs. They're not nearly as broken, I guess, for lack of a better word, as the 6th grade ones that were replaced.
Mark Berkowitz, can you add a little bit of light to number 10 about the HVAC? Because I look at that, and that I think has been on there every year since, or we've talked about it every year since the renovation opened, and it just, you know, is it critical? No, but at some point, the building's been open for the new part for 16 years. We still don't have air in there. Correct, Mark?
Yeah, there's no heat and there's no air circulation there. That we open doors, but when it's stagnant outside, you obviously can't do that in the winter. When it's stagnant outside, it doesn't help. And it's two rooms that are combined, and with all the windows in the dance studio, the exercise room, that room gets really cold in the winter and obviously really hot in the summer. I'm still baffled that we built a weight room, a dance studio, and 4 team rooms with no air circulation, no ventilation in any of the rooms. So at some point, this all needs to get dealt with, and I think this is the first step towards that.
That actually kind of sounds, considering the current environment that we're in with COVID and how important air circulation is almost a safety issue to me. I could be mistaken on that, but that's just my thought.
Yeah, we did purchase some air purifiers and put them in the team rooms to at least make them cleaner and a little more fresh. But yeah, it really does need to be addressed.
Now, just I think in the weight room, it has some capacity for fresh air intake. It's not significant. But so there is avenues there for things. So I guess I just want to balance the safety concern with what our needs are. Is it ideal? It is not. And as Mark mentioned, it's been several years since it was like an afterthought to not do that. But we do have things in place to help with our air circulation.
Yeah, I mean, it should be noted, the facilities guys are great trying to come up with workarounds, getting out, doing whatever we can. But it's, to put it blunt, it's a Band-Aid approach. And as Mark said, this has been going on since, well, if those of us that have been here forever, we didn't have air conditioning in the new gym. Thank goodness we have that, because that's wonderful. This thing about the double extension door to the gym at WIS, can you talk a little bit about that, Phil? Like, is that a mitigated safety issue? What is that again? I forgot.
It is. I don't remember the full the backstory with it, but my understanding that this is somewhat of a safety concern.
Okay, any other questions on the Capitol? Okay, and those are the documents that we produced for you. I don't know if anyone has any other questions, feedback, thoughts on any other aspect of the budget?
Actually, I'm sorry, the capital, when we talked about things that, if we need to do some cuts, the repaving actually sounds prime. Sounds right. If we're going to get rid of something, I mean, it's such a huge line item. And, having just driven there this morning, I didn't really see any massive issues there. I think if we could put that off for a year or two and address some of the more, more pressing needs, I think that would be a good idea if possible. Just my 2 cents.
Tony, just real quick, and just on that topic, do we leave this on the list as it is and then wait for a vote, or do we proactively remove it from the list?
You know how these discussions go every year. My view, this is my view, and it's we can take a consensus and decide what we want to do as a board. I think that from my discussions with the first select woman, it seems like there is going to be a lot of infrastructure items on the town list this year, right? Not sure what affordability is going to be and how the discussion will be with the Board of Finance, right? But I imagine that the list will be somewhat long. I may be wrong, and there will be a big discussion about things that maybe should be moved to next year versus things that are real priority versus just spending the money on infrastructure needs for the town and schools this year. So my view is I would just leave it on the list and have it as a discussion item, understanding that if there's something that we can live without, this could be taken off the list. But, given the fact that there has to be a fulsome discussion anyway about every line item on this list with the Board of Finance, and this list is combined with the town list, I think we just leave it on the list, and with the view that, our view is that there's things that we need that are more, that are higher priority than this one. And if the town can't afford this one as a capital item for this year, then so be it. That's kind of how I view it, but would love to get others' opinions as well. So
Real quick on what in terms
we'll leave it on the list. So I guess we'll leave it on the list if there's no other.
For the heating pump replacement, do we request a contingency and have the discussion as well with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance?
Yeah, I think that will get nixed. Sorry, but I think, yeah, you could leave it on, but my feeling is that's gonna have the same effect we had last year.
I agree.
Which is come to us with the capital item when you need it.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Tony, can you clarify? I know that we're all in the community taxpayers insofar as we're all going to feed into one town budget.
Yeah.
But there's this fine line between the facilities that the town has to provide for the Board of Ed to educate. So just going back to roads, would roads be considered something that town has to supply, or so from a budgeting perspective, leaving in and leaving it out, it's just ultimately where does the money come from at the time the project actually gets done?
It comes from the town. It really is ultimately comes from the town. It's all, when you add up all the budgets and the capital budget, it does all go into the mill rates, right? So it just, but from a mechanics point of view, it really is part of the town's capital budget. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is when you start looking at budgets and people start pushing back at certain budgets, and they push back at, for example, the Board of Ed budget, which is overwhelmingly money spent to educate our children. Then
Right,
you look at things like infrastructure, the roads.
right.
Does that potentially hurt the Board of Ed insofar as it's a line item, it's a cost that, yeah, like you said, as a community, we as taxpayers will wind up paying, whether we pay it from,
Right.
it's all going to, right.
Yes.
So,
It,
yeah.
yes, and the way the discussion typically goes is operating budgets are discussed first, and then capital budgets are discussed afterwards, and then the entire spend is discussed in the context of what this means with respect to the revenue that the town is getting and the overall spend for that year. And so what typically happens is the operating budgets are done separately first, but not voted on. Everything is voted on together, but it's typically done piecemeal, which is operating budgets first, then the entire capital budget for town and schools are done. And then you look at the entire spend and the impact to the taxpayers.
Thanks.
Phil, do you want to move to the multi-year?
Sure, Tony. I believe you had some questions on.
Yeah, can you put up the latest one? Probably the one in the Q&A, right? Which is probably the latest one.
Give me one quick second. Can you see Tony or not yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the question I had, so if we go down that budget, right, the multi-year, so right now, what you're assuming is if you go down to the, can we see the whole thing on one? Can we see the whole thing on one?
It's gonna be a little. Can you see that?
Yeah, almost there.
Almost, okay.
Just a little bit. Yeah, that's good. So if you basically go to the top, you added for next year, sort of worst case, the 100 and, well, we don't know if it's worst case, but let's say that's if we had to basically roll the 3.7 head count back in, right? It adds 132,000. What you're assuming for salaries pending negotiation really right now is what, the current salary increase tables?
Correct. So I'm using the rates that we currently have in the current contract, just because
Right. That's right. Okay. So, and then if with all the negotiations that are going on with the 3 unions, when do the new salary increases come into effect? Which budget year?
That budget year 23-24.
No, the new salaries will come into effect in 23-24?
Correct. Yep. So this
Okay.
22-23 is a final year of the current contract.
Yeah. Okay. So the new salaries be coming. So we don't know really what that number is in terms of salary increases. We're just using the current and rolling that forward for the 3 years.
Correct.
right? So the 132 is sort of, that's like a, what, 0.2% or 0.15 or something
Yes,
like
something
that?
like that. Yep.
Yep, okay. Health and dental. So the numbers are different for increases each year. What is your assumption there?
The assumption for health and dental, well, let's focus on the dental claims will continue to be self-funded.
Right, and that's basically rolling through the operating budget.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's a reduction here because we'll see the big impact in 22, 23, and then that will sort of level off in 2024. The 333,000 that's here assumes that we will remain with the state partnership plan with, I forgot what percentage increase is, but that's for each year here, it assumes that we will continue to be with the state partnership plan. So no
Right.
change to the current structure.
Now, if we went, and this is a big, this is a huge if, but I think, everyone wants to understand when we talk about potentially changing plans, right? And it's probably not a great, it's probably not great having this discussion, but I think it's important because I think people want to understand a little bit of potentially the order of magnitude of potentially changing plans. I know you did some analysis before, but we haven't, obviously we haven't talked to any of the unions or anything like that, but what kinds of numbers are we talking about potentially?
And are
Right.
you when you say numbers, do you mean the savings or the actual administrative costs of changing plans?
No, the savings.
Okay.
So as Tony mentioned, it's always a little bit difficult to have this kind of discussion with all the given caveats. We have to negotiate with the unions and everything
Right.
else. And the ultimate cost is based on whatever it is with how we negotiate with the union. With that
Right.
said, if we should change the structure from, let's consider that what we have with the state partnership plan is a fully funded private insurance. If we should make a decision that we want to move away from the state partnership plan and move to another private insurance with some kind of high deductible plan,
Right.
a few things that we have to keep in mind, right? Whatever carrier it is, the ultimate cost will be whatever their reimbursement rate are with their providers. And secondly, also what will determine our premium will be based on what we're seeing for claims experience.
Mhm.
So given that, assuming that our rate with this new carrier is, if we see no rate increases, we will save $300,000.
Right.
If they price it very aggressively, we could see a greater savings up to $300,000. We
Right.
could see it. So it really all depends on how they price it. What we're seeing, or what we saw last year when our health insurance consultant kind of priced it out for us, is that a lot of the carriers, they came in a little bit aggressive in year one. But what we're seeing in year two, in terms of the cap, for last year, when we looked at it, we were seeing somewhere for about a 12% cap for year two. So what that means for us in a nutshell is that you save the money in year one. In year two, you're pretty much going to be where you ended in year zero, so to speak. So we could save maybe $500,000, maybe more. But the final number really would be based on what negotiation is all, what we determine based on negotiations.
Yeah.
And again, it's a significant number, right? We're looking at about, well, maybe close to 1% in terms of overall savings to our budget. What we have seen in terms of claims experience, just for full disclosure, year over year, we're from 21, 22, and again, a lot of it has to do with COVID, right? For 21, 22, just in our true claims experience, we saw an increase of about $600,000 for claims experience. Historically, there have been some ebbs and flow, but over the past 3 years or so, based on numbers that we have received from the state, our claims experience have been a little on the increase, and that could be for several different reasons. It's always difficult to determine where you'll ultimately be with claims, because it varies from year to year. And so just thinking about where we want to be, right? We can, if the board of finance wants to assume some level of exposure and they want to be with a self-insured fund, you do have a lot of exposure there. Yes, you can mitigate it by having several different kind of insurance, but I think in terms of just rate stability, and not the alternative, if we move away from the state insurance plan, is to go with a private insurer with a high deductible component.
Yeah. So what percentage increase are you assuming here in the 3 years in the state partnership line?
So I'm assuming a 1% increase for each year going forward for this budget. I think we're at for the 22-23. We're assuming a 6.5% and 1% for every subsequent year going forward.
So 6.5 and then
7.5.
Yeah, and then 8.
I have to double check, but I think I either went with a 0.5 increase or
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything on what are you? The other large item are special ed and out of all our contractual, which are out of district tuition, settlements, our transportation. What are you assuming there?
So we're locked into our transportation contract through fiscal 24. Just give me 1 second, let me scroll here. So in terms of contracts, the contract. All right, so Xenon Plus ends upcoming fiscal year. First student ends in 24. And our cleaning services also ends in 24. The big increase there really is with our in-district transportation. We're currently at about a 6.5%. So we're hoping we do have a new fleet of vehicles. We did replace our fleet of vehicles over the past 2 years. So we're hoping that we'll see some savings there as we go in. I think we'll also start to explore the possibility of reducing our overall fleet, but I have to start having some discussion with first students as it relates to all of that. So there is some fluctuations there in terms of sped overall, and what any potential savings could be. It's difficult to say.
Yeah.
It really is based on the needs that we have for our students for those years. So I think I assumed for SPED in terms of out of district tuition and settlements and out of district costs, out of district tuition and settlements, I'm assuming that will remain level for those years. And I'm also assuming a small increase, I believe, for transportation costs.
Yeah.
So in terms of big ticket items that could sway our budget in any given year, it's a 3 items that we always talk about, right?
Yeah.
Talking about salaries, we're talking about health insurance, and we're talking about maybe transportation and maybe SPED. Those have been the significant drivers to our budget over the past several years.
So what you're, from this discussion, obviously just big picture, if everything goes our way next year, you might be low twos to 3% increase, and then for the out years, you don't know. But we're in that 2.5 to 3 kind of range.
Yeah, right, and typically when we look at it last year, we were at about the same in the same range at about a 3%. It becomes challenging for us when we present our budget, because we've been in a mode of where we've always been trying to cut, because trying to balance the responsibility that we have, firstly for our students, and secondly the responsibility that we have with the constituents or the taxpayers in terms of being fiscally responsible. We've always tried to find creative ways to reduce our budget. We're finding that we are running out of those creative solutions to mitigate our budget. So we are seeing maybe a 3% or so increase for each year going forward. as we look at it right now.
Questions, comments?
It really, really helps to have this 3-year pro forma outlook. It's promising, and I appreciate it, Phil. Thank you.
You're welcome. I do want to point out, as I just saw this here. For our budget for next year, we do have the plan to lease equipment. It's very important. It's very important that the board commits to this leasing option, because if we do not fund the leasing option for the next 3 or 4 years, the plan to have money within the budget to continue to replace these items, it defeats the purpose. So it really is a long-term commitment to continuing to fund technology for this plan to work.
Dan, I don't know if you would have anything to add to that, Mr. DeVito?
No, Phil basically explained it well. If it only makes sense to do leasing is if we lease every year over year, or that will just compound. If we lease 1 year and choose to outright purchase the next year, that's really going to mess up, the budget calculations. So this is a long-term investment that will also build in, a replacement plan for most of the critical equipment we have in the district.
And the idea behind that by going to the lease, Phil, Dan?
Well, this, we're going through 4-year leases will hopefully, it will make sure that we don't have a situation like we've had in the past with older laptops and trying to use them. And it being a capital lease, again, it's not like a lease when you lease a car, right? You get it for $1 at the end and you own all of the equipment. So this will help us make sure that we have effective equipment for both staff and students, as well as equipment on the back end that is solid and that we know is going to work, and make sure things are working within their useful life, and we are replacing the equipment before it hits that end of support from the company.
And can you just refresh our recollection in like 30 seconds about how COVID kind of, how we had to quickly get stuff because of COVID? And
Yeah, sure. So obviously, technology has really been important in education, but with the pandemic, that's really made it very apparent. And the district pivoted very quickly into a remote learning scenario. However, there was some equipment that we needed to get and purchase in order to facilitate this, especially last year, putting together the teacher toolkit. And we have found that the teacher toolkit, it has life, like the iPads and stuff. It has life beyond just the pandemic, and that we're seeing such an immersive educational experience for staff and students with this technology that it's helped open the eyes and help everybody become even more comfortable using this technology. And we want to capitalize on that use of technology and the comfort that staff and students have now with it.
and to have a solid plan to sustain this. So we're not like, oh my God, scrambling. The best thing is to do at least, correct?
Right, exactly. That
Thank
builds in a 4-year replacement cycle for the critical equipment.
Any other questions or comments on the multi-year? So we have any kind of further questions on the budget? I think this is the time where I think everyone should step back and love to get the board's view on the overall budget. We're getting to the point where we need to actually agree to take a vote on both the operating budget and the capital budget. Love to get everyone's view before we leave today to see what we need to do for tomorrow evening, if anything, before we actually go into a vote on both the operating budget and the capital budget. So let me open it up. Anyone can jump in. Love to get your views. I'm not going to go first.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's been a lot of time and effort on the administration's part to put everything together, and it looks like you've done a really good job. And it looks as if Phil, I heard you loud and clear when you said every year we try to find areas that we can cut back in. And, it's becoming increasingly more difficult because there's only so many times you can keep going back to the well. No one in town wants to see a large increase as far as our budget is concerned, or a large ask. But I do think it's important. The DERG budget comparison sheet was really kind of eye-opening as well, to put it all in perspective as to what other schools in similar size and also larger in the vicinity are doing. So that being said, I think that you guys have done a really good job. I'm not really seeing other areas in the operating budget where cuts really can be made. But I have got some concerns about whether or not we are going to be covered in other areas. And the one in particular is a hot button, I know, but considering what we're going through right now with COVID, the SPED budget, I think is, I'm nervous that the SPED budget that we are putting in place right now is conservative. So I don't necessarily know. I know we've spoken about this in caucus. I don't know if there's really anything we can do as far as the budget is concerned, but I'm just a little nervous that we're going to pass this budget and then find that our SPED requirements are going to be higher than what we've asked for. And we're going to have to go to the Board of Finance for that. And I just don't want anybody who's listening to this call right now to be surprised if we end up having to do that. And I know that there's going to be a lot of pushback in town, but there's, obviously SPED is a very difficult thing to talk about publicly because of privacy concerns. But from what Tracy told us the other day, there's definitely a concern as far as emotional needs from the students based upon the current climate, and what we as a school are going to have to pay to make sure that their educational needs are being met while their emotional needs are also being met. So that's just my 2 cents. It's just a red flag. So I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think that's a significant point, and it will be part of the discussion with the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, as it is every year. And sometimes if there's small amounts, you find room somewhere in your operating budget, but sometimes if they're really unexpected, you have to go back to the Board of Finance.
Can I ask a clarifying question, perhaps, and others feel free to jump in on what Sharon is saying. Is there a particular aspect of special education that that concern stems from? Because, looking at outplacement, looking at social emotional staffing in the different buildings, I'm just trying to get a sense of what perhaps some of the concerns are. Maybe it's everything.
My concern is outplacing. And it's not with the students that are currently being outplaced, but it's with the students that are feeling a need. I think specifically it's within the high school community and what's happening. And, as Tracy said the other day, parents made a unilateral decision after agreeing what to do with, during their meeting, they made a unilateral decision to still move forward. And that increases our cost. And, as a board, we can't tell them what they can or can't do as far as the emotional well-being of their child is concerned. However, as a board, we also, we have, as a district, we have a responsibility to make sure that the educational requirements are being met by that child or for that child. So it's specifically outplacements, and it really is specifically in, I would say, high school, but we may encounter this in middle school as well. So that's my big concern.
Yeah. Also, as Tracy said, you can have a family that moves into town tomorrow. That requires an outplacement.
I don't have a question. I don't have a question per se, but it would be helpful just for me to hear kind of confirmation of my own recap of what we're looking at. So at the moment, we're looking at about 3.48% increase, right?
Mhm.
And of that 3.48%, I think Lisa and Phil said about 70, was it 70%, 78%, 80% of it? 78% of it is contractual obligations. So then we look at the difference, and it would appear to me we're doing a lot with not a lot, and I think that's kind of how I'm summing it up. And I guess what I'm looking for is just confirmation on the. I've heard it 3 times. So 78% of the 3.48% is contractual obligations. We can't go there. So when you look at the remaining amount that is being presented, it's a lot we're trying to do a lot with very little, and there's not very much to cut back. It's not like there are things that are super discretionary. So just, as I kind of think it through, and I've been reading the budget, that's sort of my takeaway. So I was looking for sort of confirmation.
Yeah. I'll pile on there. Dave, I think that's absolutely right. And for the newer board members, last year and previous years, we've talked about these concentric circles, and that the inner circle is where the students are served by our great educators. And that's the circle we want to protect, right? We can cut a lot of stuff out here, but where this relationship and this real work happens is what you want to protect. And I'm not seeing anywhere in the budget where we can cut without impacting that inner circle. I mean, we've had some conversations year over year about on the administration level about, 2 assistant principals in the high school, and is that necessary? We will, we're not going to get into that today, because I think of all years, we've talked about this, Sharon, of all years, or Bernadette, this is the time to keep everything in place that way. But I agree with you, Dave, that I think I'm looking at it, and I'm trying to find places to cut, and anything you would cut at this point would really impact the children and their educators.
Well, there's one, David, one of the things, and I think I want to clarify that a little bit. While we do have contractual obligations, you remember that if we don't have that particular FTE, you don't have that particular contractual obligation, right? So that's the way you actually deal with if you need to, that's really the only way to significantly deal with your contractual obligations. The issue is this year, when we have a significant amount of intervention going on, both academic as well as social emotional, that's not really the place that anyone, like, Taffy said, that's not the place ultimately that you can find a lot when we're focusing on adding interventionists, right? At least in the short to medium term, right?
Yeah, so this sort of touches on a conversation we had at one of the other meetings or workshops, where if you want, you being, the educators, the administrators, and the town wanted to increase our class size, then that's where you could start looking at reducing FTE. But if there was even a desire to do that, this would probably not be the year to consider it. We're adding interventionists to help our students get back on track after being away from the regular education for quite some time. So to add interventionists and then cut a first grade or a second grade teacher, you're back essentially at the starting point. So that's sort of my takeaway as far as cutting FTEs. If the only way to cut FTEs is to increase class sizes, and I think, as Ms. Kata said at one of our last meetings, for a lot of these kids, especially the kindergarten and first grade level, I think maybe second grade too, she said, their teacher is their first, only, and often point of contact. And so to make the class sizes bigger, you may have kids that have a need, but now the teacher doesn't have the bandwidth to provide that child with the services that they may be seeking. Was that sort of my takeaway from what you said, Laura, last time?
Yes, at the elementary level, the classroom teacher really is the student's primary point of contact throughout the day. They also teach multiple content areas, so their ability to work with individual students and meet them at their individual levels is very important. And certainly we've seen that amplified by the pandemic. Students coming to us with a variety or lack of early childhood experiences has really compounded that, and that ability for the classroom teacher to be responsive to those needs in the moment and consistently is very powerful. At the elementary level, there's also still a lot of parent communication. You know, the parents are very much a part of those conversations and those frequent ongoing updates on student progress. You know, students aren't, you know, advocating for themselves as they do when they get into the secondary level. The parent is very much an important piece of that. We want our teachers to be able to be responsive as much as possible to those questions, those conversations, and to really be proactive.
And the advocating piece is actually an important one, because that kind of, in my mind, if you can just confirm this, I guess, Patty would be, yeah, helpful. And then of course, Dan and the high school, when the children can start advocating for themselves, that you still need to provide them support resources at that point. So the advocacy sort of changes potentially at the lower grades, the elementary grades, where the teacher is going to be looking for those anomalies and looking to reach out to that child that might not know how to advocate for themselves. And then at the WIS level, the middle school level, and certainly the high school level, you have more of that one-on-one, I presume, you know, at the WIS level and the middle school level, where you get to know the administrators get to know the kids and they know the kid, right? So you probably have the ability to see something's just not right. And so you need that level of administrative staffing. And at the high school, the kids will advocate for themselves, and someone like Julie needs to have the resources available to address the kids who are going to advocate for themselves. Do I sort of have from a staffing, you know, ratio of, you know, educators, administrators to kids, you know, is that sort of a decent description of how we're trying to make sure that we provide for our students?
I think so. I mean, the thing that we have to remember the most is, and the exact number is, it's not 78, it's 76.7% of the budget is salaries and benefits. Benefits, which includes insurance and other things, is 18.9, salaries is 57.8. But when you look at, you know, every person, you know, connects with kids, whether it be at the high school level where it's their teachers. You know, oftentimes there's talk about, well, let's put in another a social worker or another psychologist. The first level are the teachers in the classroom, the adults in the classroom that start, and then it just builds from there. And if you you know, we're at a tipping point right now. We can't lose people. If we lose people, it would have an adverse effect. We have reallocated, we have restructured, but you're absolutely right. I mean, let's take 5 teachers away from K-5. We'll save $500,000. At what cost to our children? And then those children, remember, it's a K-12 journey. And as they proceed to middle school and high school, if we don't have that teaming model at the middle school and go back to it, we will not have those connections. If we do not have a robust academic and co-curricular program at the high school, we lose those connections. You know, all those stipends that associate with people that connect with kids. I can't say it enough. I really do not know where we would go. We have done the very best we can, but any cut to any more staff, it's going to have an adverse effect. It is to our kids.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I think in answer to Tony's question on the budget, you know, I'll chime in with my thoughts. And I think, you know, first and foremost, I don't think spending more money necessarily equates with better outcomes. But what I am encouraged to see in all the workshops creating the district goals, what we've posted for the public to see on the website, is a real emphasis on academic rigor this year with measurable outcomes and a return on investment, so that we can really see where each dollar is being spent and whether it was effective. I think we need to focus in getting to an academic place of comfort here in the schools where we've achieved our district goals, and then we can look back and see how we achieved it. What was successful, what wasn't, what do we need to spend to sustain those levels of academic success and comfort. Then, once we've achieved that, we need to look and see what our competitor districts are doing. Where are they investing in their budgets, and what are they doing in their schools? Because our schools are our biggest asset here in Weston, and that's what draws people to our community. So we need to think, once we get past that level of academic comfort and success, what can we do to distinguish ourselves? And again, that doesn't necessarily equate with spending more money. It's internal capacity, it's understanding the assets we have, our one campus, it's understanding the student to teacher ratios that we have, the fact that our administrators travel between buildings and we know our students, the teaming model at the middle school. There's a lot of things that we are already doing to distinguish ourselves, but we need to keep an eye on our competitors, and we need to understand what we can do to further distinguish ourselves in a positive direction. And lastly, we then need to understand what appetite our town and our taxpayers have for achieving those next level goals. How do we want, we have a responsibility to act in the best interests and the desires of our town and taxpayers. So I kind of see this budget, for me, having been on the board now for 3 or 4 years, or 3 budget cycles at least, is, to me, this is promising in the sense that I think we have a really a path forward that we can see to partner with the town and our taxpayers and achieve great things for our schools. So it's hard to know whether this budget is perfect or great or good. But I think we will know next year when we look at how we've spent the money and we have the return of investment and the measurable outcomes to measure these things. So that, that where I'm coming from, I'm comfortable with what you've proposed. I think it's smart, and I think it's responsive, and I think it's academically rigorous.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, just to hit on a bunch of the points that we've already heard, we've done a lot of work to look at the budget and make sure that the academic and the social emotional needs of the students are at the forefront of what we're looking at, and having the technology, the staff to be able to support those goals. And another really important thing in our conversations is just how much the administration is ongoingly looking at adjusting and taking what we have and reinvesting it in what we do. And that makes me feel much more comfortable about going forward with the budget as well. Social emotional is very important to me, as it is to everybody in the school going into next year. And even having conversations about if the need for the second school psychologist, district-wide psychologist comes up, that there are ways to be able to make something like that happen if it becomes a need, is really important to me as well. So we have the ability to adjust if something unexpected comes up, but also at least making sure that we're putting forth a really strong program and addressing everything that that the students look like they need.
Thanks, Bernie. Anyone else?
I think I'm the last to speak of the board members after such a rigorous first exercise for me.
Yeah.
And I appreciate effort from all parts. It's quite a remarkable process. My distillation is sort of a messaging, right? It's really an amalgamation of two sort of coalescing concerns or areas of focus. One is, like Melissa said, success trajectory, right? So that's sort of a healthy learning environment. And there's interventions and resources being applied to that as one coalescence. And that amalgamates with an area that I've been paying close attention to, which is capital and facilities. And that's sort of the health of the learning environment, right? So you have these two coalescences coming together. And, it's clearly more heavily weighted towards the former, right? Success trajectory and healthy learning environment. And I don't have a concern, but I like to keep an eye on making sure that we don't undermine or undercut sort of the health of the buildings and the health of the environment, right? Particularly in air treatment. So that's my 2 cents. An interesting intersection of two sort of equally important areas to focus on. So just thank you for all the input.
Thanks. So I think that we're going to be about 1/3 of the way through the entire budget process when we're done. And so we'll be really closely now we'll be talking about from here on out our needs versus town affordability. And so the discussion will kind of enter into that phase. And I think that every year, once we pass the budget, it's our budget to defend every item on this budget. Now, as we go through the budget process with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, we'll have an opportunity to look at those big items, like where are we going to be actually with our health insurance increase? We'll have more visibility on that, and I'm sure that will be adjusted. We'll have more visibility on our special ed outplacements and settlement line that may or may not be adjusted going forward. So there are an opportunity to adjust some of those big items as we go forward, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance over the next few months. The one area that's always been an area for discussion is headcount, right? Because that's really the big, we are a human resources organization, and headcount's always the big item. And and I agree with Melissa in that this is that 1 year where we have to address so many needs in terms of our students, both reentry post-COVID versus and meeting our not only our social emotional goals, but our academic goals. And so this is not a year, in my view, and I think I agree with the rest of the board members, where I think we're willing to really take a big cut in those areas, because we really, at the end of the day, all understand and all agree that we really need to invest and see what the outcomes look like at the end of the year. We have very specific goals. I think we've appropriately funded those goals. And now we have to kind of roll forward and understand and really see how well we executed those goals, and then reevaluate next year. So, I think I agree with all of you. I'm pretty comfortable with the budget as presented. I think it was clear. I think the investments are as I view it, in the appropriate area. I think there's still some work we probably will need to do over the next couple of months as the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance take a look at the budget. We may have to come back and look at a few items. We may not. We just have to see how it goes. But I think I agree with all of you. I think the sentiment is that we're probably pretty comfortable with the budget as is, with the view that I'm sure there'll be points that we're going to need to revisit over the next few months as the other boards review and deliberate on our budget. So I think the next step is tomorrow evening, unless there's further deliberation and questions, we'll probably go into a vote on the operating and the capital budget, and then pass it along to the Board of Selectmen for review.
So if we move, just for housekeeping, if we move tomorrow to move forward and vote, it sounds like perhaps Thursday's meeting would be canceled.
Yes. Yes. And so we need language. We're going to need language posted. We're going to need page, any revision of the pages posted, and because I know there's some revisions to staffing pages. Phil?
Yeah, there is. That's not for tomorrow, right? That's when after the vote, before we get it.
Yeah. Yeah, before we pay, whatever pages need to be revised, we just need the language posted for tomorrow evening.
Got it.
So The pages need to be revised
No, not for
Not,
tomorrow.
not for tomorrow, before it, anything
before it
that,
goes to the Board of
Yeah.
Ed, Board of Selectmen.
yeah, before it's locked.
Okay, and then we also do a transmittal letter
Yeah.
about that going there. Okay. And the next meeting with the Board of Selectmen for all of those people watching is
February 8th.
February 8th.
February 8th.
There's 2 meetings scheduled with the Board of Selectmen to review the budget.
Thank you. Okay.
There was one more item, I think, when we go to the Board of Selectmen as well, and this is, we've had discussions with them early on with Melissa and Lisa in terms of areas of collaboration and areas of shared resources with the town. I think that's another thing that I think we need to actually raise in our February 8th meeting with the Board of Selectmen to continue pushing on whether there's some low hanging fruit in terms of areas of collaboration that could save the taxpayers some money.
Okay. So we meet the 8th, and the other meeting scheduled with them is the 15th.
Yeah.
And we have our board meeting is on Valentine's Day, the 14th, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just putting that out there, 8th, 14th, 15th. Getting everything straightened in my,
We may want to think about maybe moving our meeting on the 14th to the 15th. But
well, the 15th, we have Board of Selectmen review Board of Ed budget.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I
Why are
think
you
that's
thinking it's Valentine's Day?
What's that?
Why are we moving the 14th? Because of the
Yeah,
romantic holiday?
yeah, if people want to, it's up to,
just that everyone.
just throwing it out there.
Yeah, the meeting with the Board of Selectmen, the second meeting is an if necessary meeting.
Yeah. We can
So
always think
we'll-
about that.
So we'll have a sense on the 8th if we need the other meeting.
Yes,
And if we don't, then we can move our meeting to the 15th.
if you'd like,
It's all the same to me, whatever you guys want.
okay.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Well, thanks everyone for digging in again. And we'll continue tomorrow evening at 6.
And
Can I have a motion?
thanks to you, Tony, who's doing the lion's share of the heavy lifting on behalf of the board. We really appreciate it.
I think it's the team effort. It's always a team effort.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
All right, with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to
So-
adjourn?
Second?
I second.
Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned. See you tomorrow evening.